Alright guys, I know, with this video we're getting a little bit niche. That's right, we're going to be talking about the film adaptation of a property you've likely never heard of. This one's an underdog, seriously, a hidden gem. I'm just fucking kidding, I can't go on about this. We're talking about Wicked. This is the Wicked video. The Broadway adaptation that's taken the world by storm and is holding space in the hearts and minds of every theater kid who ever was.
I didn't know that was happening.
Wicked saw its stage debut in 2003, where it quickly graduated to a massive run on Broadway before undergoing its first national tour in 2005. It's based on the Gregory Maguire novel Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West, which functions as a sort of revisionist prequel to and slight retelling of The Wizard of Oz, imagining its Wicked Witch in a more sympathetic light. While the novel was a success, spawning several sequels, the musical was an inescapable cultural juggernaut. Even if you've never seen the show, even if musicals aren't your bag, you've heard Defying Gravity. And if you haven't heard Defying Gravity, you've heard Popular. And if you haven't heard Popular, you've heard For Good. I mean, I'd keep going, but I think you get it. Mounting a prequel to one of the most iconic films of all time is a tall order, possibly the tallest, but this property managed it. The Wizard of Oz, directed by Victor Fleming, was released in 1939, the same year as Gone with the Wind, a film he also directed. Insane. It was immediately recognized by critics and audiences as one of the great Hollywood films to date, but its reputation grew in the ensuing decades such that it became one of the most ubiquitous and recognizable films in cinema history. Judy Garland's Dorothy is cinema reduced to its very essence. For its eye-popping use of Technicolor, its iconic cast of characters, its unforgettable production design, and its inescapable tunes, The Wizard of Oz is a film that seemingly lives in a person's unconscious mind before they are born. For this reason, I won't bore you by continuing to explain what The Wizard of Oz is. If you don't already know, congratulations, I think you've defied cosmic odds. 60 years after the wizard took up residency in the recesses of the human mind, Wicked emerged as one of the most successful and iconic musicals of the new era. It made stars of Kristen Chenoweth and Idina Menzel and commanded endless 99-cent iTunes purchases for fans who couldn't get enough of the original cast recordings. Naturally, Hollywood would pounce on the rights to a property like this, and early development on a screen adaptation began in 2009. After fits and starts developing Wicked for 2 limited TV series, one bafflingly not a musical, the property gradually drifted into the world of feature films. After rumors of a Rob Marshall-directed film, yikes, Stephen Daldry, best known for Billy Elliot and Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, was eventually hired to direct the film, but fell off in 2020 due to scheduling conflicts. Enter John M. Chu, whose recent success with Crazy Rich Asians and then forthcoming In the Heights enabled a collective amnesia and made industry gatekeepers forget that he also directed G.I. Joe Retaliation and Gem and the Holograms. 4 years, the industry guillotine chopping the script into 2, and one Ariana Grande later, Wicked has arrived. So the question is it any good? And my answer is yes, but it's more complicated than that. The fervor surrounding its release is understandable because it does a lot of things right. And when a property so beloved translates to the screen with any level of success, it will naturally be celebrated. Any misgivings you may have about Ariana Grande quickly melt away. Her Galinda is a pitch-perfect comedic performance that genuinely surprised me with its bullseye. And Cynthia Erivo is amazing as the titular Wicked Witch, whose life and motivations are much more complex than Oz heads would assume. The way she conveys a depth of emotion, even slathered in green paint, is endlessly commendable. On top of that, the songs are great, but I mean, we already knew that. Before we go any further, I'll get my bias out of the way. I had absolute bottom-of-the-barrel expectations for this thanks to some bad trailers, an MCU-ified Sheen, and Cynthia Erivo's weird lashing out at fans on Instagram. Like, I really don't even know what that was all about. So it really shouldn't come as a surprise that I'm less high on this film than most people. That being said, I do think it's a good movie. Not great, good. It rises to be more than the sum of its parts, but I also think it's a more frustrating film than it needs to be because the sparks of greatness are often undercut by clumsy execution. The thing that seems to be missing from the hyperbolic Wicked conversation is, well, deserved criticism. Is this John M. Chu's best work to date? Probably, but how much of that is sturdy material and excellent on-screen talent? I would argue a lot. It's not a flop of a musical or a cynical, creatively bankrupt ploy by the studio, despite what the part 1 might suggest, and there's something really special here, but not without some glaring faults. In short, the performances and source material are a powerhouse, occasionally fumbled by a very glossy and ugly-looking movie that fails to live up to the pedigree of The Wizard of Oz. Wicked is still an enjoyable time at the movies, and there's enough craft on display that's able to sweep you up in the magic of it all, but I found it to be an incredibly frustrating watch, despite being on the cusp of something truly special. Now, if I haven't pissed you off too much to this point, let's dig into it. I'll even do my best to focus on the good. I promise there's a lot of good to break down here. So you think it's time to try defying gravity, huh? Do you know what gravity even is? Do you know why its acceleration is measured as 9.8 meters per second squared? Well, you can learn that and much more with this video's sponsor, Brilliant. If you're a longtime viewer, you've definitely heard me talk about Brilliant before on this channel, and for good reason. I love these guys. They're amazing, and they're one of my favorite platforms out there specifically for learning new skills, because it's designed to be uniquely effective for each individual that uses it. Brilliant might not have a course on how to make your face less green, but they have recently launched a ton of equally valuable and fun courses on collecting data, all of which use real-world data to train you to see trends and make better informed decisions. This content is perfect for learners of any level to start to continue learning data analysis, with a fully built-out suite of new content from Bayes' theorem to multiple linear regression. Learn how to parse and visualize massive datasets to make them easier to interpret, gain insight by working with real datasets from sources like Starbucks, Twitter, Spotify, and more. And if all of this sounds too sophisticated, like for example Miss Morrible's sorcery lessons, don't worry. Brilliant's courses are simple, straightforward, and easy to understand. Each course welcomes learners at every level and teaches you the specified skill set in a way that's both engaging and interactive to help you learn the things you want to learn. Brilliant helps you build an understanding of the material from the ground up by closing every lesson with a hands-on problem to solve. It helps you to not only learn, but retain concepts by building your critical thinking skills through problem solving, not memorization. Right now, you can try Brilliant for free for 30 days by visiting brilliant.org/filmspeak or by clicking the link in the description of this video. Give learning a trial run, as well as receiving 20% off an annual subscription. Again, that's brilliant.org/filmspeak. Click that link in the description below. You're gonna love it, you're gonna be smarter, you're gonna defy gravity, and thank you so much to Brilliant for sponsoring this video. The characters in this thing, good. The performances, great. Cynthia Erivo is remarkably nuanced in her performance of Elphaba. So many micro expressions that really clue us into how she's feeling and what she wants. She may be soft-spoken, but she is ultimately stern because of the adversity she has faced in life. She is constantly doing penance for her very existence, though through the course of the film, she realizes that her power exceeds that of all, and she must wield it to the most noble ends, regardless of what those in power want her to do. Ariana Grande, on the other hand, is so shockingly good as Glinda, it's tough to wrap your head around. Like, I get it, Ariana Grande obviously started off as an actress and then became this pop star, but like, I think her pop star persona allowed us to forget that she's a good actress as well. The quality of vocal performance goes without saying, but her comedic timing is second to none. Every laugh line hits, and the tiniest physical choices feed into what makes this character so electric to watch, no matter how annoying she may be. Like, as shocking as it may seem, I get why she's in every Best Supporting Actress conversation. There's a remarkable level of nuance and subtlety behind every action, and she manages to take what could be an insanely unlikable one-note Regina George-type mean girl and bring out the complexity behind her privileged upbringing. She's woefully ignorant and selfish, living in a bubble. More on that later. Now, let's talk story, which is often eclipsed by show-stopping tunes in a musical. Here, there's a lot to chew on. Wicked is the story of an outcast named Elphaba who finds herself at a magical school, sharing quarters with the most popular socialite on campus as they navigate their tense journey from being foes to friends. As this conflict resolves, a larger political conspiracy develops and requires a major sacrifice from both of them. It's an inspiring tale of finding the strength within yourself to rage against the societal beliefs that bear down on a person until they're frozen in place. If you have to conform to a point of rejecting your very personhood, suppressing your own voice in exchange for attention, is it worth it? Wicked argues that we're all one step away from being rendered a scapegoat. I mean, literally in the case of this film, for a propaganda machine. It's a tragedy about how we manufacture our own enemies as a means for control. As an outsider, a person who looks different and interfaces with the world in their own way, Elphaba is given a shitty binary choice. Agree to be a tool of the oppressor in exchange for validation, or fight for her beliefs at the cost of violent persecution and a campaign of lies. For a candy-colored musical with a relatively whimsical relationship at its center, this is a big idea, and the importance of clinging to one's core values is contrasted beautifully with the desire of people like Glinda who thrive on performative action. So long as she can say, hey, I tried, and retain her status, remain in her bubble, that's all that matters. Until she's confronted by nemesis-turned-friend Elphaba, whose fearless knowledge of herself eventually chips away at Glinda's narcissism, until she can see the importance of true praxis and resistance. For all of her shallow qualities, Grande's remarkably nuanced and specific performance very clearly traces the journey from oblivious ignorance to true understanding. She cares for Elphaba and understands how horribly she initially treated her, but she's still struggling to find balance between helping her friend and preserving the comforts of life she's always been afforded, whether she wants to admit it or not. Perhaps a stand-in for suburban white women, you know. Her lack of meaningful action makes her complicit in the persecution of Elphaba. For Glinda, to be good is to perform goodness rather than act in a noble way. But can we blame her? I mean, from birth, Glinda is told that she is special and deserving of all that she desires. She is, by way of comparison, as I mentioned earlier, the Regina George of the Wicked universe. As long as she stays the course of the wealthy socialite, doesn't ruffle too many feathers, and performs goodness, she will be rewarded. Her pampered lifestyle contrasts harshly with Elphaba's, who has been told her whole life that she's a scourge, a stain on her family's otherwise sterling reputation. Born the child of infidelity and emerging a little green goblin, she is rejected by her aristocrat father, for whom optics is everything. Her birth is so jarring that her father goes to great lengths to ensure it does not happen to her younger sister, unwittingly killing Elphaba's mother and crippling her sister in the process. For Elphaba, her very identity, her very being, is a source of pain and anguish for others. She feels dutiful obligation to those around her and lives for any shred of validation. You can clearly see why it would be very difficult for these two to share a dorm, which is milked to very amusing effect in one of the film's most rousing musical numbers, What Is This Feeling? But one can't help seeing that this conflict is a bit deeper and more human than a person could reasonably expect from the Green musical. One of the best and most powerful scenes in the film comes at the crescendo of Dancing Through Life, when Glinda and Elphaba finally come together in genuine harmony. What begins as a mean prank ripped straight from a 90s teen movie, wherein Glinda gifts Elphaba a self-proclaimed hideous hat to wear to a dance at the Ozdust Ballroom, what transpires is something truly unexpected. Earlier in the day, Glinda has committed one of her transparently selfish acts of good by redirecting the affections of the Munchkin Boke to Elphaba's sister, Nessa Rose, telling him that it would impress her if he would so kindly take this underprivileged girl to the dance. In doing so, she frees herself up to pursue the princely Fiero, while Nessa is overjoyed by Boke's overture. When Elphaba finds out about this, she is initially skeptical of Glinda's intentions, but ultimately decides it is better to allow her sister joy than to stamp out her naivete with the cruel reality of Glinda's manipulation. In the end, Nessa and Boke have a great time at the dance, and despite Glinda's selfishness, she has done what is ultimately a truly good deed. However, when Elphaba arrives wearing the hat, to the audience's eyes, a stereotypically pointed witch's cap, the ballroom falls silent before Elphaba's peers begin to point and laugh at her unsightly fashion. For an uncomfortably long couple of minutes, Glinda remains silent, as is her tendency. After all, it is best to appear generous without actually taking any personal risk. But eventually, she is overwhelmed by the discomfort. She sees someone who wants to be seen, who is proud in who they are and has no intention of changing who she is. Glinda is so unused to confronting the consequences of her actions that, whether she likes it or not, she learns a lesson in kindness. It is at this moment that she joins Elphaba in the center of the dance floor, not because she wants to be seen as a friend to a social outcast, but because Elphaba has finally been humanized to her. She understands the world best in binaries of social haves and have-nots, and to see her peers so humiliated hits her somewhere deep and unexpected. It's easily the most human and emotional and best scene in the entire film because it's the moment where Chu takes a step back and allows the moment to play out, allows the characters to speak without saying anything, to speak through action and movement. You get so much between Grande and Erivo in that scene. I wish the entire film had that level of emotion and mature storytelling and nuance. It's so beautiful. It'll really hit you in the feels, even if the rest of the film largely isn't working. From this point forward, they are friends, and Glinda's life becomes a lot more complicated. Once Elphaba and Glinda reconcile their differences, you think all will be well and good, unless you have, seen a movie before, and a larger conflict emerges. There is a national mandate to silence talking animals, to pull them from society and put them back into cages. This is one of the more brilliant ideas in Wicked, which is admittedly most attributed to the source material. The subplot begins with some uneasiness around Dr. Dilliman, but we're so concerned with the story of Elphaba and Glinda that its gradual escalation is almost invisible until it reaches a boiling point with the professor's violent removal. This slow burn is a carefully considered depiction of fascism in the way a frog in a pot of slowly heating water doesn't realize it's being cooked alive until it reaches a boil. The film does a nice job of teasing this eventual revelation in the moment that Elphaba unwittingly loses control of her magic in the school courtyard and shatters a mural, revealing an older mural of animals, the beings once in control of power. We don't grasp that significance until later. The tragedy of the story comes when Elphaba meets the wizard and realizes that the social acceptance she has yearned for all her life is attainable so long as she remains a token of the wizard and lends her power to help mask his fraud. This is not true equality, it's just reshuffling and shifting the crosshairs to another demographic. By refusing to fall in line and threatening the Imperial Order, she becomes the villain. Her love for animals and the downtrodden will keep her forever at odds with Oz. The fact that Elphaba was raised by a bear bolsters her natural empathy. She was rejected by her high society father and thus tended to by a bear, learning that animals may look different from us, but otherwise possess all the empathetic traits of humans. So when she sees this national mandate to return animals to cages and rid them of speech, she leaps into action. She realizes that fear is a tool wielded by those in power to engender false ideas about reality and those different from us. After all, is it such a stretch to think society could be turned against a person with green skin if they could so quickly turn on their animal friends? The animal subplot takes one of those weird elements of the original film, the fact we meet the Lion, Tin Man, and Scarecrow, and then never meet anyone else who isn't human for the rest of the movie, save for the flying monkeys, and recontextualizes it to add layers of meaning to the original. The wizard is explicitly a charlatan who pretends to have power and yet is still treated like a good guy by the end of the story. But here, the land of Oz, the Emerald City, is turned into a weird ethno-state ruled by a sleazy conman. And if that doesn't speak to the current moment, I really don't know what does. It's really fucking smart and makes sense of the world in a way that the original never did. Elphaba is truly powerful, but real power is in control and perception. Popular is probably the most important song in the entire show, and while it initially speaks to frivolous social dynamics, its message about the importance of public images encapsulates the power of the wizard and the danger of being able to shape public perception not only of the self, but of another. In many ways, this theme takes on a meta layer in that the entire project is about reclaiming the Wicked Witch from the way she is villainized by the Wizard of Oz and revealing the deeper truth. And I think that's pretty cool. Quick aside, speaking of popularity, the one character who seems to be shortchanged just a bit in this adaptation is Fiyero, played beautifully by Jonathan Bailey. Just what an absolute spark on screen. Fiyero arrives out of the blue, a stock cliche of princely sex appeal, and predictably woos Glinda with his very presence. However, he is more interested in Elphaba because he relates to her values and her sense of alienation, despite being one of the most popular kids in school. While the two share a shocking amount in common, their approach to the social world is very different. Fiyero feels like he needs to perform to be accepted. He needs to project that he doesn't care about stuff that he actually does. but he ultimately sees Elphaba for who she really is and surprises her. When Dillamond is ejected from school and Elphaba jumps to the defense of the animals, she is shocked when Fiyero is also willing to take a noble stand. I wish we had just a little bit more of that, a bit more understanding of this guy and what's going through his head, and more time between Elphaba and Fiyero, but I guess that's why there's a part 2, right? The core of Wicked is interrogating how we get villains such as the Wicked Witch of the West. The book and musical were essential to kicking off the misunderstood villain trend that remains extremely popular today. Wicked asks not only what creates an evil person, but what evil even is. Is it an ideology or a matter of perspective? And if the latter, does it arise organically, or is it imposed by those in power as a tool for oppressing ideas critical of the state? Big questions for a pop musical, you gotta hand it to them for that. But again, when you're adapting that incredible book, it makes sense. Now, as promised, let's get into the bad. My intention is not to harp, but only to illuminate some points of meaningful critique that have been paved over in much of the popular discourse. First of all, I don't want to beat around the bush. Wicked is an unmitigated eyesore, a marble slab, a tired continuation of the signature MCU gray. Gotta love it. It simply looks like shit. More specifically, dog shit. The poor blending of CGI with the practical sets, all flattened by a bizarrely desaturated color palette, makes for eyesore after eyesore, and it's frustrating because I know how much stuff was done for real. The sets are extravagant. They are real sets. These costumes are incredibly layered and detailed. Like, the world is all there. The production is all there. But when I'm watching it on screen, I never feel like I'm watching anything more than a CGI rendering of what this should be. And that's frustrating. That all comes down to poor directing, really poor cinematography, baffling choices. Why is this movie lit like this? Why is it backlit to shit? Why does it look like the most just bland and boring thing you've ever seen in your entire life? This is in the canon of The Wizard of Oz. What are we doing? The performances and energy make you want to forgive the look, but it bears repeating. John M. Chu has been on record in recent interviews explaining that the more muted palette was chosen in an effort to make Oz feel real, to make the human struggles relatable in contrast to the dream of The Wizard of Oz, or whatever the hell that means. But I'm sorry, that's just fucking stupid. From an intellectual standpoint, it abdicates the responsibility of creating a world that feels reconciled unto itself and true regardless of the color palette. I'm sorry, buddy, but countless filmmakers have used high style and saturated colors to tell stories that still resonate on a human level. I mean, hello, Wachowskis. If your abilities are so limited that you need to dial down the saturation 20% to connect with your audience, not only are you underestimating their intelligence, you're also putting their own incompetence on blast. And I get it. Am I being harsh? Probably. Is the criticism warranted? Yes, The Wizard of Oz is one of the most beautiful films ever released by an American studio. You go watch it today and it still hits you in the face with wow and wonder when Dorothy opens that door and you see the vibrant Technicolor on display. Its contrast to black and white and rich Technicolor is not only a technical feat, but an emotional one. The way that transformation engages the audience on a visceral level makes Dorothy's journey that much more compelling. I don't want to visit an Oz that's grounded in reality. I want to visit one of the most vibrant, striking, jaw-droppingly gorgeous fantasy worlds in all of fiction. If Chu was so concerned with separating Wicked from The Wizard of Oz because Wicked doesn't take place in some girl's dream world, as he mentioned in interviews, I think he's missed the point. By virtue of the fact that Wicked exists, Oz is not some dreamscape in a girl from Kansas's head. It's an actual place. Rise to the occasion, man. If you're playing in this world, you have to try harder. You have to at least make an attempt to reach the cinematic precedent set by The Wizard of Oz. Even if you fail, you probably will. At least we'll have seen the attempt. Hell, you have the budget. Even just shooting on film would have afforded you an inherent richness and texture and contrast not found on digital, or at least in the case of this film, not found on digital. When Oz the Great and Powerful, yeah, the James Franco one, is a more visually appealing film despite its CGI madness, we have a problem. But, I guess that's what happens when you have someone like Sam Raimi at the helm. Secondly, splitting the film into two parts is not inherently problematic, but there's a lot of air in here to pad out the runtime, which makes it hard not to imagine a version of this that uses its second act at shiz to more economical effect, so that more story could comfortably fit in a single feature. It's not that Wicked shouldn't be a two-parter. In fact, I think there's a strong argument to be made that, maybe it should be. However, this feels like it's using the studio's two-part money mandate as license to be lazy in its pacing and structure. If we're making two films, tighten this one up. Make it as propulsive as possible so that there's not a 20 to 30 minute stretch in the second act where I'm checking my watch. There's a laziness to counting on the audience's anticipation of the next song they know to carry the film through a needlessly protracted scene. If the film had more scenes like the Ozdust dance, then yeah, I'd be okay with having this be a two-parter because at least we'd be getting more emotional and intimate moments between the characters that's really fleshing them out, that's really using the length to the benefit of the story and the characters. I don't feel like we're really getting that here. To this end, the film has a claustrophobic quality which feels a bit ironic for its expanse and runtime. We get very little sense of the landscape of Oz outside of the school, and we should really be feeling the darkness of Oz and its corruption throughout. Yes, there's the one scene where the animals are meeting in secret, but outside of that one individual scene, there's really not a whole lot of this. This isolation keeps some of the film's more compelling thematic ideas from resonating as well as they should. As I've said, the animal subplot is one of its strongest features, but by limiting us to the contained perspective of the school for much of the film, it ends up feeling ill-defined. What does this look like outside of the academic sphere? What is life like for those in Oz outside of shiz? I have no idea. I'm not asking for a totally different movie, but I do think that if we're going to have a 3-hour sequel, it behooves the filmmaker, no pun intended, to widen the aperture just enough that we have some context for the larger world he intends to explore when we return to Oz. If you make the comparison to Harry Potter, which some of this does feel like, yes, most of the film takes place at Hogwarts, but prior to that, you have a pretty strong idea of the world outside of Hogwarts. When Harry goes to Diagon Alley, that is Harry interacting with the larger world around him. When he's interacting with people at the pub and they're questioning him or they're acting all shocked about Voldemort and everything, you get a sense of this larger looming threat. And I think that's what helps everything at Hogwarts have more weight. That is not the case here with Wicked. Lastly, and perhaps most damning of all, is the fact that Chu often gets in his own way with the musical numbers. Not only are they just the most boringly shot and cut together sequences imaginable, which unfortunately makes the choreography seem a bit meh. Take Defying Gravity, for example. This thing is a fucking showstopper. It doesn't matter. It's a certified slam dunk no matter what you do. When the song reaches its peak, you're lucky if it doesn't blow the roof off of your local AMC. And yet, it feels as though its impact is dampened, maybe just slightly, by some very confusing filmmaking choices. By the time Cynthia Erivo is singing "So If You Care to Find Me, Look to the Western Sky," the quality of the performance and the wide shot of her floating just out of reach of the soldiers is so exuberant as to transcend all qualms, but the lead up to that peak is pretty clumsy. As the song is building, Chu cuts away from Erivo to establish a scene and place far less important than this song that is the culmination of everything we've seen in the film's first 2.5 hours. Our attention should be nowhere but Elphaba's moment of profound self-actualization. And yet, he keeps fucking cutting. Imagine if you saw the musical live and the stage production kept dropping huge set pieces and screens in front of Elphaba as she's reaching her emotional peak. That's kind of how this first half of the song feels. It ironically disrupts the rhythm and energy that is essential to a musical's success. All of these propulsive numbers, all of these emotional climaxes are kind of capped at the knees because of moments like this, because of interruptions. And I get it, yeah, sometimes musicals have talking bits in the middle of songs, but those are usually baked into the DNA of those songs. And when they're done on screen, as they are done on stage, it works. You never feel like it's halting the momentum of a scene. When it's done here and they pad out a song longer than it needs to be, it lessens the impact of the emotion that is building. All right. Now, I know I'm ending on a sour note, but I should remind you that taken as a whole, I do think Wicked is a good movie. It's a lot of fun. I don't begrudge a single person for leaving that theater with a big smile on their face and a warm feeling. Maybe it's what we need right now, given the state of things. That's exactly what a big 4-quadrant movie should do. But I also think it's important to advocate for ourselves as the audience. It's not enough to completely deliver a familiar translation of a property we know and love. No, it's enough to clear the low bar, sure, but not enough to make a great film. With Wicked Part 2, I know they're already shooting it right now, but I would urge John M. Chu to reconsider how he shoots this thing, how he constructs these set pieces, these musical numbers, and to reconsider his color palette, if anything. I would urge him to let the musical numbers breathe and resist the urge to cut to some random bullshit on the downbeat. And I would urge him to earn every minute of screen time. Don't take your audience for granted. Deliver an experience worthy of the massive shoes you've stepped into. I'll give the film this. It successfully defied gravity. Next time, I hope it'll defy expectations.